Hey everyone, how's it going? Azren here. Hope you guys are doing well. I want to talk about balancing active and passive language learning because I think they're both really important, but I think they play very different roles in your language learning journey. Now, let's define these two terms. And the way I view it, active language learning is when you are actually studying and trying to remember something in a language. So that might mean you're in a classroom and you're learning vocabulary, you're memorizing vocabulary. That might mean that might mean you're reading a book and you're trying to really understand what's happening in the book, right? Active could mean you're practicing your conversation skills and you're actively trying to improve your conversation skills, right? So that's kind of the active side. The passive side is very opposite. The passive side is things like listening to music as you drive, or maybe listening to some podcast as you're like at work. Or passive could even mean like, maybe it's like you're just hanging out in a lot of Spanish or French or whatever environments, and you're just passively listening to the people around you. So really the big difference is that active, it's usually a lot harder on your brain and you're really pushing yourself to learn something and push yourself forward. And passive is usually, it's not usually overly challenging, overly difficult. It's just something you're doing it's just like surrounding yourself with the language that you're learning without really pushing yourself too hard. Now, the funny thing is that I actually think you need a bit of both. You need to balance both the active and the passive side to really see the fastest growth that you can in the language. Let me give an example. I was talking to a lady, I was like, what was it, 2 days ago, I think, or yesterday actually, talking to a lady who's very frustrated. We're at this Spanish restaurant, we're doing this event, Spanish board game event, and she's like, I don't know if this is gonna help me. Like, how will this help me? I don't know if I'll remember all these words. Like, I don't get it. And she was stuck 100% on thinking active language learning is what helps. And that's not true, because the passive stuff, what that does, when you're just in a Spanish environment, or French environment, Chinese environment, whatever environment, when you're in that environment, even though there's 1,001 new words, new expressions, grammar, all this stuff coming at you, and you're understanding very little, it's saving somewhere in your brain. Somewhere in your brain, it is saving, and it's planting all these little seeds all over your brain. Then what happens, when you go to study it actively, all of a sudden it's going to be easier for you to figure out, because passively, you've already heard it somewhere, it's planted in your brain, so when you actually study it, you're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. And you're like, that's pretty easy. You have no idea why it was easy, but it was because you had the seed planted before. I fundamentally think one of the big reasons that my Spanish is so good, Spanish and French for that matter, is because I spent lots of time surrounded by Spanish and French in moments where I wasn't overly focused on trying to capture everything. Just, listening to music, maybe like I'm on the bus and I hear two people talking and I sort of eavesdrop. It's like, oh, cool. Watch a little video here and there on YouTube, just casual stuff, right? That you don't really learn much from. And it's all this passive stuff. They don't feel like you're learning in the moment. But when I go to study actively, I feel like it's all reinforced. I'm like, oh yeah, that just makes sense. And even sometimes I have the thought like, I think I've seen that somewhere. I must have heard that somewhere. And I have, and I could never tell you where. But it's the passive that supports the active. The passive language learning supports the active. It supports it. And without the passive, the active is so much harder. It's so much more difficult. The passive, what it's doing, it's like if you're working out or something, and you're doing, I don't even know if this is how it works, but hopefully this analogy works. It's like if you're working out and you were already a relatively active person. You're relatively active already before going to the gym. Like you went for walks, you played tennis with your friends. All of a sudden, when you go to the gym to really actively try and get stronger muscles, my gut feeling, I could be wrong, but my gut feeling is that it's going to be naturally a little bit easier because you have an active lifestyle. But if you sat on your butt at home every day in front of your computer, and then all of a sudden you go to the gym to build your muscles, it's going to be really challenging because you're used to sitting on your butt all day. Same thing with this active and passive. When you do the passive, when you're doing the passive things, listening to music, watching videos, all that stuff, it's just preparing you to succeed when you go to active things. So I think one of the big things, this just got me another idea here. I think one of the big things is that you cannot only do passive and you cannot only do active. If you only do passive language learning, you're not going to move forward. If you do only active, your progress is going to be really relatively slow. You need them both. You need them both. Do them both, you will see the most progress and the fastest. So hope you guys liked the video. Talk to you guys later. Bye for now.